Right to international news now. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has ordered his government to submit proposals on the possible resumption of nuclear weapons testing.
It started with a flash, an amber glow that tore through the Pacific sky near Hawaii. On a quiet Tuesday night, radar stations from Pearl Harbor to San Diego lit up with alerts no one wanted to see. Russia had just conducted a high-altitude nuclear test over international waters, barely 1,200 miles from U.S. territory. Moscow claimed it was a technical atmospheric assessment. Washington called it something else, a provocation. The blast wasn't a detonation in the traditional sense. It was an EMP test, a nuclear device launched into the upper atmosphere to measure how an electromagnetic pulse would ripple through communications, satellites, and radar grids. But something went wrong. The pulse ricocheted across unanticipated magnetic lines, frying Russia's own surveillance satellite network that had been quietly orbiting near the test site. Within minutes, over a dozen Russian early warning satellites went dark. The test had backfired. Inside the NORAD command center in Colorado Springs, analysts watched in disbelief. "We've never seen that before," one operator muttered. The blackout blinded Moscow's long-range detection systems, leaving large patches of Siberia, the Arctic, and the Far East defenseless for the next several hours. To the Pentagon, that window meant opportunity. Within minutes, the U.S. Air Force's Pacific Command issued a directive that sent shockwaves across the Pacific theater: scramble the F-35A fleet from Alaska and Guam. Their destination? A vector toward the Russian Far East, and eventually, symbolically, toward Moscow. At Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska, pilots suited up under cold floodlights. The order was classified as a recon verification, but everyone knew what it really meant: a power move. Within 20 minutes, 3 F-35A Lightning II stealth jets capable of piercing radar like a whisper were airborne, slicing across the stratosphere. Refueling tankers from Kadena Air Base in Okinawa prepped to meet them mid-flight. The message wasn't subtle. It was Washington's way of saying, "We saw your test, and we can see you." Meanwhile, in Moscow, the Kremlin scrambled to regain control. Defense Minister Andrei Belousov stormed into the National Defense Control Center. The loss of satellite data meant Russia couldn't confirm whether NATO had launched a retaliatory strike. Every radar screen showed static. In the confusion, multiple air defense units went on full alert. S-400 missile batteries near Vladivostok and Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky were armed, waiting for orders. But orders require information, and Moscow had none. In Hawaii, U.S. Pacific Command officers pored over spectral readings from the explosion. The EMP radius had been smaller than expected, but its radiation signature confirmed it was no routine test. The weapon yield suggested a tactical nuke, around 100 kilotons, launched from a modified RS-26 Rabesh missile platform. Analysts cross-referenced telemetry data and quickly realized the real danger wasn't the test itself. It was the loss of Russian command visibility. A nuclear power temporarily blinded could make desperate moves. President Elaine Carter was briefed in the Situation Room at 3:27 a.m. Eastern Time. Her expression remained still as her advisors debated response options: economic sanctions, diplomatic warnings, or a show of presence. She chose the third. "Let them see our jets," she said quietly. "Let them wonder how close we'll get." By the time the F-35s crossed the Bering Sea, the Russians had already mobilized MiG-31 interceptors. The skies near Kamchatka turned into a silent chessboard. U.S. pilots flew with transponders off, using terrain masking and stealth formations to avoid radar detection. But Russian ground stations still picked up faint radar shadows. For hours, both sides played an invisible cat-and-mouse game, edging closer to a confrontation no one wanted. Then something unexpected happened. One of Russia's S-400 units accidentally misfired. A missile launched skyward toward what operators thought was a hostile craft, but it was one of their own reconnaissance drones. The self-inflicted strike illuminated the radar gap left by the failed satellite network. American surveillance immediately detected it. Within minutes, the Pentagon had the coordinates of every active Russian battery in the region. The next move was psychological. The U.S. Cyber Command deployed Phantom Pulse, a classified operation designed to spoof radar reflections across eastern Russia. The tactic made it appear as though dozens of American bombers were streaking toward Moscow when, in reality, the skies were nearly empty. Russian radar screens flooded with ghost signatures, false targets spreading like wildfire. Panic rippled through their defense networks. Fighter jets launched from multiple bases, burning precious fuel in pursuit of phantoms. Inside the Kremlin bunker, Putin's inner circle convened an emergency session. The nuclear test that was supposed to showcase Russian dominance had instead exposed its fragility. Western media got wind of it within hours. Satellite images leaked by independent analysts showed electromagnetic interference stretching across the Pacific, confirming the U.S. interpretation. For the first time in years, Russia looked vulnerable. Meanwhile, the F-35s hovered near the edge of Russian airspace, close enough for their synthetic aperture radars to map military installations, but far enough to avoid provocation. They captured images of scrambled Russian aircraft, naval movements in the Sea of Okhotsk, and even radar sites flickering on and off like blinking lights. That data, transmitted back to U.S. Space Command, painted a devastating picture. Russia's northern defense grid was in temporary chaos. As the jets refueled over the Arctic Circle, global markets trembled. Gold spiked by 4%, oil prices surged past $100 per barrel, and Asian exchanges went into panic mode. The European Union held an emergency session condemning Russia's reckless nuclear actions, while China issued a carefully worded statement urging stability among strategic partners. Behind closed doors, Beijing's military analysts quietly celebrated. The test had weakened Moscow's technological credibility. But back in Russia, the consequences deepened. The EMP blast not only disabled satellites, but also disrupted communications between several Pacific Fleet submarines and their command posts. For nearly 7 hours, Moscow couldn't verify the positions of 2 nuclear-powered subs in the Sea of Japan. That blackout alone sent shivers through NATO intelligence circles. If one of those subs misinterpreted the radar confusion as a first strike, the results would have been catastrophic. The U.S., however, handled the situation with precision. Rather than push further, the F-35 pilots veered off at the 90-minute mark, turning northward to signal restraint. They transmitted a short coded message via secure channel, eyes on target, returning home. The act of restraint, flying near but not breaching Russian territory, was as powerful as any missile. It said, "We could have entered. We chose not to." Back in Washington, President Carter addressed the nation in a televised statement. Calm but firm, she declared, "The United States will not tolerate nuclear recklessness near our territories or our allies." Tonight's events prove that any nation that threatens global stability will face swift, visible, and decisive awareness from the free world. Behind her, the Pentagon released radar footage showing the F-35s returning safely, an image broadcast globally as both reassurance and warning. In Moscow, state television spun a different story. Anchors claimed the test had been a success, that foreign aircraft were detected and repelled, and that Russia remains in full control. But independent reports from within the Russian military told another tale: confusion, damaged systems, and a rush to restore broken communications. Analysts estimated it would take weeks to recalibrate their early warning network. Internationally, the diplomatic fallout was immediate. NATO allies demanded transparency, Japan issued a maritime protest, and even India expressed grave concern. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, with Western powers pushing for sanctions and Russia's ambassador accusing the U.S. of airspace intimidation. Behind the posturing, however, was a quiet realization shared by both sides. The old balance of deterrence had shifted. By dawn, satellite imagery confirmed the test's aftermath, a wide band of electromagnetic disturbance stretching across 600 miles of ocean. Civilian ships reported temporary navigation failures. Airlines rerouted trans-Pacific flights. In Hawaii, locals woke to news broadcasts of unusual cosmic activity, while scientists at the Mauna Loa Observatory scrambled to measure radiation traces in the upper atmosphere. It wasn't lethal, but it was unmistakable proof a nuclear detonation had occurred far too close for comfort. The 3 F-35A jets landed back at Elmendorf just before sunrise.